Welcome to the Unpacking the Framework video series. This series provides valuable information about the National Best Practice Framework for Early Childhood Intervention. My name is Denise Luscombe, and this video introduction is being recorded on Wajak Noongar Budja. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and the land you are listening from, and recognise their continued connection to country, waterways and community. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. This video is one of a series that describes the evidence and practice information that underpins the principles of the National Best Practice Framework for Early Childhood Intervention. You will hear from both national and international speakers throughout this video series. This video covers family-centred, a key principle of the National Best Practice Framework for Early Childhood Intervention, and is presented by our national speaker, Professor Nick Hopwood. Nick is Professor of Professional Learning at the University of Technology, Sydney, School of International Studies and Education. His research focuses on agency, how people can change the trajectories of their lives and young people they care for. He has investigated many different early childhood intervention settings, including residential services, sustained home visiting, toddler clinics, day stay, child and family centres, playgroups and parenting groups. He has also worked extensively with clinicians and families caring for children who tube feed, and is a co-founder and co-director of Succeed Child Feeding Alliance. His background is in education and learning science, and so he comes to issues of early childhood intervention and family-centred practice as matters of expertise and mutual learning that promote agency and capability.
Hello, my name is Nick Hopwood. Before I share my slides, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm on the country of the Gadigal and Gayamagal people. My focus as part of the National Best Practice Framework for Early Childhood Intervention is on family-centred practice. Before I go further, I'd like to clarify, not all carers are parents, although parents is a commonly used term, and if I use it when I'm speaking, it's not to exclude carers, it's just as an everyday placeholder term. I'd also like to mention that siblings are often important carers as part of a family. Family and caring mean different things in different cultures. My intention here and in the framework is to be inclusive, even if at times I might use imperfect placeholder terms. You might start by thinking, where is the child in family-centred practice? Surely there is, or should be, child-centred practice. In my understanding, the idea of family-centred practice is not there to displace the child from being at the centre. The child is at the centre, and we value the child just like we would in child-centred practice. However, what family-centred practice ideas do is see the child as part of a family. Many of you might be familiar with Winnicott's famous phrase, "There is no such thing as a baby," meaning we always see a baby with someone. What family-centred practice does is have the child at the centre, but the child is part of the family. I'd like to propose that we can understand family-centred practice very helpfully if we think about it as an issue or a matter of expertise. And expertise is really important and crucial to making a difference for families. However, used in a problematic way, it can de-centre the family. Expert-led models have been shown frequently to be problematic. They put the professional and their knowledge at the centre, and parents and carers are expected to comply with professional directives or advice. Parents and carers or wider family members might end up feeling judged and disempowered. Their compliance with advice, however well-intentioned or potentially effective, may be very low. Some families may even choose to disengage from services. In an expert model, what happens is practitioners often tend to model directiveness. I think you should do this, why don't you try that? when what they're encouraging in families is responsiveness to children's cues. An expert-led model can, unfortunately, build dependency rather than capability. So understandably, there have been many moves in different models and guises and practice frameworks in different countries to move from expert-led models to other alternatives. And it's important to think, yes, of course, we don't want to be bossy experts, but sometimes what we've found is that the response to that has been to be nice. And when relationships become a key focus in the family-centered practices, that's important. It's crucial, the relationship between the practitioner and the family. But it's easy for a practitioner to get stuck in that relationship. What do I mean by stuck? Well, a practitioner or professional might feel hesitant about using their expertise, all that knowledge they have, all everything they studied, all that formal understanding, all their insights and experience from working with many families. Practitioners can be nervous about challenging parents or carers because presenting something that might be difficult or awkward or uncomfortable might threaten that relationship. Being nice to families still doesn't build capability. The idea of partnership between professionals or practitioners and families, including siblings and wider carers and things like that, puts families at the centre. A family-centred approach involves working in partnership with families to better understand their circumstances and to decide on the strategies that will suit them and their children. That's from raisingchildren.net.au. It's a very commonly expressed idea that to put the family in the centre, we need to be in a partnership with families. That partnership means that the agenda for the support that's offered, the strategies that might be suggested, even the focus from one week or one day to the next or 1 month to the next, will be negotiated with families, not determined in advance by somebody outside the family. The principles of family-centered practice acknowledge firstly that support works best when it's attuned to a particular family's goals, values, and everyday life. It also respects the fact that parents and carers know their children and their family best. That's a valuable resource, another complementary form of expertise that partnership work would seek to tap into. Family-centered practice recognises that all families have strengths. No matter the circumstances and challenges they might be facing, there are always strengths. Echoing what I said earlier about the idea of family-centered practice not displacing the child from the centre, it recognises that children do well when their family is also doing well. A thriving family is a condition for a thriving child. So we're interested in the family because we're interested in the child. The final principle is that we recognise parents and carers benefit from a range of sources of support. They may be formal sources, like from professionals or practitioners in various different services or programmes. They might be informal through peer programmes, or even through their extended or even quite close-knit family. And all those different supports can be understood, connecting between the principles, as strengths. I'd like to propose, based on some research that I've done and wider understanding of evidence and literature about family-centred practice, that it's helpful to think of some family-centred partnership as a living practice. When I mean living, I mean something that's ongoing and requires nurturing and effort and attunement, just as a plant or a child might. I see it as this kind of outward going spiral where steps taken earlier allow steps that are taken later, but it's not a linear path. Of course, we'd like partnerships to make a difference to families, which is why I'm using the phrase impactful partnerships here. I'm suggesting we can think of an impactful partnership as a journey around this spiral. The first aspect of a living, impactful partnership is the work that needs to be done to gain acceptance with a family. Practitioners need to earn the trust that parents and carers might afford them, to be accepted as what I would call an intimate outsider in family life. Intimacy, that practitioners will know things that might make families vulnerable, that even close friends may not know. But outsiderness, in that there's always that difference, that you're not part of the family. How do we do that? We listen closely rather than waiting to speak. We reflect back to show that we are listening, not judging. A parent might say, "Oh, I'm putting my child, what I've found that, giving my child boiled sweets at night really helps them sleep," rather than kind of judging the giving of boiled sweets. A practitioner might be listening and reflecting back and saying, "Oh, I wonder what it is about the boiled sweets that helps them calm down for sleep," for example. Working to gain acceptance is about bringing parent and carer insights to the surface. That question I just suggested about boiled sweets might help a mother or father or other carer reveal something about how they understand and know their child. We also gain acceptance by securing quick wins to show we are there to make a difference, not just to be nice. And we live out that we care by doing things like remembering details. If a birthday is coming up, or a parent said or carer said something that was going to happen on the weekend, visitors or going to a park or a picnic, remembering those details is a way of living out, showing that you care. Living partnership practices that put families at the centre also support families to value themselves, feeling positive, capable, and that they have something important to contribute to the process of dealing with whatever challenges it is that the family might be facing. This is very important so that families don't feel like a sort of passenger in a process of somebody else is fixing their problems for them. How do we do that? In some ways, echoing what many of you will know about how we might interact with young children, specific labeled praise. A practitioner can notice things about what parents and carers are doing, identify that, and mention it as something positive that parents can feel capable and that they are contributing. It's important to discuss with parents and carers their own self-care. This is why it's slightly different from a child-centered approach. This family-centered approach remembers that principle that the child does well when the family does well. This is how we support families to value themselves, by mentioning and encouraging self-care. And it might be important to dwell on what matters to parents and carers. I remember an example. I was shadowing a home visiting nurse, and a mother had been quite distressed and had been a big argument over the weekend with her mother-in-law. And the mother said, "Well, we always argue because she's a Capricorn." And the nurse working with her said, "Oh, I'm a Sagittarius, what are you?" At that moment, it was really important that the mother felt legitimized and valued in her understanding of that situation. Part of living impactful partnerships is subtle intervention. And we use the word subtle. It's not sneaky, it's not stealthy, but it is gentle and perhaps sort of smooth and part of a natural flow of things. So it contributes to partnership and to impact. One way that we've seen thousands of times in many different practice settings is when a professional or practitioner might notice something. For example, that a child in a cot kind of had kept her arms down when a mother had gone back in to help settle them, explaining the significance of what they noticed. The fact that her arms stayed down tells us that she wasn't asking you to pick her up, that she's feeling safe in the cot now, and attributing something positive to parents. The reason she's feeling safe is because you've gone in every time she's called out for you, so she knows you're there. Noticing significance and attribution, a very subtle way of offering intervention in a partnership setting. We might offer comments about parent well-being to show that they're also important. This is again that kind of subtle sort of intervention. Or asking questions that respect and assume and surface what parents might know about their child, asking, "What do you think she feels when you cuddle her," for example. These are changing how parents might understand themselves as valuable, important contributors with strengths, and understand their relationship with their child, their subtle forms of intervention. Then, of course, we have obvious intervention. This is explicitly negotiated in terms of the focus and the strategies that might be used, but it may take time to build the partnership to a point of readiness for this to occur. When engaging in obvious intervention, what we found is that in family-centered practice in this partnership model, what we really need is that intervention to be pitched at the challenge zone. We have the comfort zone, that's what parents are already kind of comfortable and familiar with. And we have the overwhelm zone, which would be too much for parents or carers to deal with at this particular moment in time. That challenge zone is what's on the edge of what they're able to do. It might be slightly uncomfortable, challenging, but we meet that challenge or discomfort with appropriate support, but we don't overwhelm. When done well, pitched like that, obvious intervention, negotiated, can strengthen the relationship if it's in those right conditions. Like any relationship, we understand that partnerships as part of family-centered practice might be strained. And this part of this living work, this spiral of impactful partnership with families involves acknowledging strain on the relationships and repair. We might misjudge a family's readiness to take on a particular strategy or intervention. We might miss the challenge zone and get into the overwhelm zone. Sometimes parents and carers might behave in ways that are not okay, that need to be brought up. Practitioners who take a lead in facilitating this repair might enable parents and carers to recognise that they are important in the relationship and that that relationship matters to the practitioner. This is again not getting stuck in the relationship, but actually acknowledging how relationships can take work. They're a living part of partnership. This helps us go from dependency to capability. Thinking about this, we might consider the outcomes in terms of the child and the family, different outcomes, but interdependent. There are conditions for these outcomes, which I'll explain, and they're not about a professional solving a problem for a family. They're not about a family complying with advice from a professional. They're all basis for transformed ways of being, relating, and developing as children, parents and carers, and families. Over time, we might expect that practitioners may become less involved as families are more able to cope and thrive, even when new challenges arrive. But I want to be very clear that in many situations, a complete kind of family on their own now, no support needed, isn't the idea of what kind of the best possible outcome. And often many layers of ongoing support might be needed in some circumstances. So if we're thinking from a child focus, what might the outcomes of an impactful partnership in family-centered practice be? Well, we have three conditions. Security, the child must feel safe and secure. The child must have opportunity to try new things that drive their learning and development. And they must have some agency, some voice and say. Even very young infants, pre-verbal infants, send us messages all the time about what matters to them, what they're comfortable with, what their preferences are. And out of a partnership, a child may become more confident in the world, even if that just means crawling to the corner of a room and checking in with their parent or carer that they're still there. It might be around the ways they can be with others. Sibling rivalry, for example, might be something that's worked on through a partnership. It might be their ways of being with their carers. It might be the way they can communicate, the development of their speech and language, physical developments, or their emotional developments and regulation. Of course, that takes decades in many people. There may be other things, outcomes of a partnership for a child that you might reflect on. You could even pause the screen and have a look and think what might be missing there. Those are common ones that we documented in many services. We can also think about the outcomes of family-centered practice. Of course, the child is there, but the child is not on their own. They're part of the family, and we work with the child as part of the family. Again, we have conditions and we have different domains or areas of what these outcomes might be. Those conditions are trust, that acceptance that I talked about between the family and the practitioner who's going to inevitably present some challenge at some point, we would think. Acceptance of that professional, those suggestions, acceptance of challenge, an openness to new things, to perhaps stepping outside of one's comfort zone, but being also trusting that when that relationship might get strained, if things get overwhelming, that it's not going to break down, or rather it can just be ruptured and repaired. Parent, if we're thinking about capability, I often think of this as an educational researcher as about parents' learning and agency. They might be learning and develop agency capability in relation to their child, or parents and carers, I would say, to themselves, how they can care for themselves, the importance of their self-care, who they are as parents and carers. their family, the siblings that might be involved, their own siblings, aunties and uncles, extended family, their relationships with others. Remember, I talked before about kind of the family-centered principles acknowledge the various formal and informal sources of support. And an outcome of a partnership may be that parents and carers have a new understanding, a new way of relating to others in their community. The idea of getting help. A big outcome might be that some families, parents and carers feel more comfortable or confident or knowledgeable about the sources of support that they may wish to access. They may have new understandings and capability around how change happens, different expectations, different ways of anticipating a challenge and recognizing the strengths. There we go, there's that strengths-based principle, and the strengths that they have to meet those challenges. And they may have new understandings around parenting or caring for a child. Again, there may be others. I think it's helpful when we talk about developing capability. These are broader things, not just, for example, can this person, resettle their child when they wake during the night, or can they, offer a bottle feed as part of a weaning process from breastfeeding, or can they manage a toddler tantrum? These are, I think, more deeper ways of thinking about what the outcomes of a partnership in a family-centered practice might be. So to summarize, family-centered practice is still about and for the child. We have not displaced the child from the middle here. The child does well when the family does well. Family-centered practice is not an expert-led model. Doesn't work. Doesn't work if we also get stuck in the relationship and feel we have to be nice and that we can't have a pathway for our expertise and we can't challenge families. If we have those two feelings, we're stuck in the relationship. Of course, expertise is important. Of course, the relationship is important. Partnership with the families is the way forward in family-centered practice, aligned with families' goals, values, and everyday lives. Pathways for expertise, because it is so important, do exist through living partnership practices, earning trust, subtle intervention, obvious intervention that's negotiated and pitched at the right level in that challenge zone and not the overwhelm zone or the comfort zone. All of those are pathways for expertise that don't have those problems of the bossy expert, but help us get away from being stuck in the relationship. It's really important in family-centered practice to be alert to and nurturing of diverse outcomes for children and their parents and carers. If you'd like to know more about the research that I spoke to that's informed a lot of what I've mentioned today and see some other ways of thinking about impactful partnerships, you might visit this website here. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be part of this National Best Practice Framework for Early Childhood Intervention. See you.
We hope you've enjoyed this video, part of the video series Unpacking the Framework for the National Best Practice Framework for Early Childhood Intervention. The review of best practice in early childhood intervention was commissioned by the Department of Social Services. Led by the University of Melbourne, the project team included PRECI, professionals and researchers in early childhood intervention, Murdoch Children's Research Institute, SNAKE, National Voice for Our Children, Children and Young People with Disability Australia, and ACD, Advocating for Children with Disability. Coordination and production of the video series was led by PRECI.